Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Inderpal Bhandari. Inderpal is the Global Chief Data Officer at IBM. Inderpal, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is all mine. So really excited for this one. Let's start with yourself, Inderpal. Could you give us a brief summary of your background in technology and your journey from where you got started to what led you to where you are today?
Well, I'm a Carnegie Mellon PhD in computer engineering. And right after that, I joined IBM Research. That was my first go around with IBM. I was part of the Thomas J. Watson Research Center as a research staff member. I was there for 7 years. That led me into data mining. I ended up doing this computer program called Advanced Scout that was used by every coach in the National Basketball Association. And then that essentially started me off on a career with regard to data and insight and knowledge. And then I launched my own company in that same space, specializing in professional sports and call centers. Did that for 10 years. And so by that time, I had a much better appreciation also of what clients were looking for, because I was on the supply side of the equation, if you would. And it hit me that it's actually very strategic for large enterprise to start exploiting that data. It would be an extremely strategic thing to do. And I got an opportunity to become a chief data officer, and that was in a healthcare company. That was in 2006. And I was the first chief data officer in healthcare. There were only 4 of us globally. And then the profession actually took off. And I had the fortune of being able to grow with it. I think of the original 4, I'm the last one standing. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it has made me realize the craft of being a chief data officer. So I know exactly what I'm going to do day one, stepping into a company, and now having done this 4 times, with IBM being my 4th stint, in terms of setting up that organizational capability for a large enterprise. I pretty much know, I have it down exactly what I'm going to do from day one to day 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, etc.
To answer that question, yes, it's certainly a good thing, because the fact that you're able to come on and talk to us means we can learn a lot from one of the original 4. So since the role of chief data officer has appeared on the enterprise level almost 20 years ago now, it's continued to evolve. As one of the very few people who can look back from day one, in your view, how has the role of chief data officer evolved over the years?
Yes, that's an excellent question, because many times people come up to me and tell me, hey, we heard you say that you became the chief data officer in 2006. You're the first in healthcare. But I was doing that kind of work 10 years before. The only difference being was I didn't have the chief data officer title. So this is, certainly true that there were people who were doing data management work for many years. In fact, for as long as computers have existed, there have been people doing data management work, and there were usually those departments, they did start growing as computers took off, and they typically reported into the CIO. So the CIO was the C-suite representative, if you would. What happened in around 2006 or a little earlier than that was data began to be recognized by the C-suite as a strategic asset. There was some recognition, some awareness. And that's why you had these roles develop. So that aspect of being part of the C-suite, of being able to work with the C-suite, having the understanding and the wherewithal to deal with that level of executive, those were the new things that evolved with this role. So that's one aspect in terms of the evolution of the role. I think that's interesting to note. The other aspect is, as it became more of a C-suite role, it also became a lot more collaborative in nature than the kind of work that people used to do, where they were in the background working on data, nobody knew about them. But now it's a very collaborative role. You have to collaborate very effectively with not only the different business leaders, but also the other technology leaders like the CIO, like the Chief Information Security Officer, like the Chief Privacy Officer. All these pieces have to work together effectively to deliver the results for the enterprise. So I think those are the two major trends that I see with regard to the role and how it's evolved.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Switching focus now slightly to AI, artificial intelligence, which I know has so many different meanings to so many different people. Given your role as the global chief data officer, there's so many different avenues we could take this, but I want to start with an area that I know is important to you, which is trusted AI. So can you give us some insight into what your view of trusted AI is and why that's so important?
Yes, no, and again, I will give you the answer in a very pat way now, but I want to just explain that it took us several years to get there. IBM has been working on AI for a very long time, and I think we demonstrated the world-class capability of AI when we had Watson beat the Jeopardy champion, in 2011, and before that it was the chess champion. But we've been working on AI for a very long time. And when I joined 5 years ago, rejoined IBM, at that point, our data strategy eventually evolved to be one of creating an AI enterprise within IBM. And the reason we did that is because IBM's business focus was all around cloud and AI. So we wanted to make money by selling AI and cloud offerings and methodologies. But then, it hit us that enterprises did not really understand what AI was. Consumers did, thanks to the likes of Amazon and Google and Facebook. People have an intuitive sense of what AI means for the consumer. But for enterprises, it wasn't the case. So last 5 years, our mission has been, make IBM itself into an AI enterprise. And since a lot of our customers look like us, we'll be able to then use that as a showcase to all of the customers. And then they will be, at that point, willing to buy and purchase our products and methodologies. So in the process of doing that over those 5 years, we came to realize several things. And it all centered around trust. Put the algorithms aside, because that's typically how people come at it with AI and say, okay, it's all about the algorithms. We realized that, in fact, it wasn't all about the algorithms. And the reason for that was eventually for AI to be effective in an enterprise, it has to get infused into every major business process that the enterprise has. What do I mean by a business process? Something like a supply chain, for instance, or the procurement process, or sales, marketing, all that stuff that a company goes through and does. You want to infuse AI into every aspect of the business. So when you start trying to do that, you get hit with a number of things very quickly. And remember, we're also developing this as a showcase for our clients and customers. So we're putting ourselves also in the chair of the customer and thinking, how would they view it? So the first thing is, if you're putting AI into every process, that means that AI system is going to learn about that process. And what's it going to learn? Well, it'll learn what some of the stuff may be known, but the other stuff it'll learn will be intellectual property that the company wants to protect. That then lets, if you're an executive and you're thinking, I'm going to hire this vendor, they're going to put in an AI system, it's going to learn all about my processes. What if they take me out of the business, if they disintermediate? So the very first thing we realize is this is about trust at that very high executive level. And so there's got to be full transparency. So that's one key facet of trusted AI. It has to be very transparent so everybody feels comfortable with what's going to happen. In our case, we make it very clear to our customers that, hey, with regard to all the data that you have, it belongs to you. With regard to any insights that might be derived from that data, it belongs to you. So unless you want us to collaborate with you to develop a business, we won't touch any of that. That's all yours. So that's an example of transparency. That was the first aspect we realized. The second aspect was, if you're the owner of a business process and there's an AI system that tells you to do something quite drastic, it's very unlikely that you will do it. I'll use an example from the days when I created that NBA program, which in a playoff game, that program came back and essentially told the coach, they were down 2-0 in a best of 5 series, said, you've got to play your backup point guard and your backup forward. And the coach was astounded. He called me and said, if I do this and I lose the game, my career is over. So I'll have lost the game, but also my job and my career. So it's the same thing, right? If an AI system asks, say, a surgeon, you've got to amputate the leg, the surgeon is going to really want to understand that. And that's true of any business process, right? Because now somebody's job is on the line. Because in an enterprise, we realize it's all about augmented intelligence, right? The humans in the loop, they're making decisions. So it's got to be explainable. That's the second major aspect of trusted AI. It's got to be able to explain the different options that were considered, rejected, why one is being put forward, etc. And it's got to do it in a way that it's not geeky, right? It's got to be done in a way that the average person who's working that business process is able to understand it and so forth. So that's the second major one, which is basically explainability is very important. Then you come to the fact that many times if you are working with an AI system, the data that it might be operating on, say if it's healthcare data or employee data, it could be quite sensitive. And so that kind of sensitive data that identifies people, it becomes extremely important to make sure that's done respecting all the laws and regulations around privacy. Otherwise, it's very soon going to implode as people find out and they'll question what's going on and so forth. So privacy becomes another key aspect of trusted AI. Then if the data is about the consumer and you're making decisions, there has to be fairness associated with it. So for instance, if a retail company that's hiring thousands of people is using an AI program to sift through all these resumes and hire people, it's got to be fair. Otherwise, again, the whole thing would implode. So fairness is another major aspect of what these systems must do. And finally, we realize that a lot of these AI systems, and that they keep improving every day, but there is an element of fragility about them in the sense that they can be tampered with. People can take adversarial action and steer them in the wrong direction. You've seen those examples of self-driving system mistakes the full moon for a stop sign, that kind of stuff. So these systems can actually be fooled like that. So robustness becomes another key aspect of trusted AI. I mean, how robust is the algorithm? And that translates all the way back to how robust is the data itself, how well was it sourced, how well was it prepared, how well was it cleaned. So those are the 5 principles we arrived at. And otherwise, it's not really going to be used within the enterprise, even though it might be great on the consumer side. So those 5 principles, if you would, then that's become our focus with regard to our AI platform. So in addition to the algorithms, to have all that stuff in place and to be able to run that in a hybrid cloud setup, by that is actually a distributed setup, that you're able to control all that in a way that's effective. And then enable our clients to do the same. So that's essentially what trusted AI means to us.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
I want to now get your take on the importance of ethical AI, making sure that AI models are developed responsibly, used for ethical purposes, and continue to function in an ethical way once they're in production. You've got a 10,000-foot view of AI applications across all industries. What are some of the things that you think companies should be doing to ensure that they use this technology in a responsible manner?
Yeah, so the ethical aspect of AI is critically important. And you've seen that expressed at all levels. The average person will talk about it, Musk will talk about it. It's across the board. People, they understand the power of the technology, but then they also are nervous about what it can be used for. And technology in itself is neutral, but the use eventually determines whether good or bad is going to come out of it. So the good news is that we've been through this road before. So if you think in terms of use of data itself or analytics on data, or for that matter, any technology, right? Governing its use is critical. So organizations that understand how to do that, they recognize that, well, you've got to set up an ethics board, for instance, in the case of AI, and then you've got to publish principles so that people understand that this is exactly how it's going to be used. But then you go beyond that and you essentially incorporate that into the design of the products themselves. So that's why you hear the terms privacy by design, security by design, ethical AI by design. What that means is you set up your development framework in a way that the constraints that are imposed by making use of ethical AI, they're just part and parcel of the product. You can't say that, hey, the business need that I'm solving is more important than these ethical considerations or privacy or security. So that's what that by design approach is all about. You build that in. And then finally, all that helps you in moving the culture to make it an ethical, and that the enterprise itself behaves ethically overall. And the reason the culture aspect is extremely important is because these technologies, they advance very rapidly. And the regulators are working very hard and they obviously catch up, but the technology is always one step ahead. And so when you're in that kind of situation, and especially with something like AI, where since you're going to discover some new insight, etc., you don't really know upfront what it is. In a sense, it's hard to even think that you could theoretically come up with something that encompasses all possible discoveries. So in a sense, it is going to be ahead. So the last line of defense is actually the people who are part of the company and who are actually working it. And that's why the culture aspect becomes extremely important. Because I mean, one of the things that I stress very often and very emphatically with all my people who are working the front lines of creating models, who are deploying them and so forth, is when you're dealing with data that involves people and you're about to do something, you should personalize it. Think of if the data was about yourself, your family, your son, your daughter, your mother, your sister, would you go ahead and do the same thing? It's things like that, bringing that to the forefront, making sure that the people will have that hat on when they're about to execute on something is eventually the last line of defense on something like this. So you have to work the culture in addition to the aspects of working the platform and the framework and the by design features that I talked about earlier.
When you're working with AI-focused leaders across various industries, what advice and guidance do you give them to identify potentially valuable applications of AIs and then helping them design a basic roadmap from concept to implementation, production, and scale the right way?
Yes. There's the guidance that we give people breaks out under 4 dimensions that, in my mind, they have to move in lockstep, in the sense that if you let one get too far ahead of the other, things are going to break down and you'll have to wait till everybody else catches up anyway, or the project itself will break down. So what are those 4 dimensions? One obviously is data, because if you're going to do AI, it depends on data. These systems actually learn from data, large amounts of data. And if that data is not prepared, that's not managed right, governed, then eventually you're going to end up either with nonsense results that don't make sense, or results that are misused and all the other stuff that we just talked about. So data is a key part of it. Technology is another key part of it. The reason for that is these systems are very compute intensive. So you have to be extremely clever and smart in the engineering of the technology and how that all works together. Cloud, the special purpose processors, the ability to conduct hundreds of thousands of experiments at scale and things like that. So technology becomes another extremely important part of the equation. These 2 are, I would say, quite well known. People immediately gravitate to that when we talk about moving forward with an AI system. The lesser known are the next 2 that I'm going to talk about. The first one is business process, the actual process that you're about to change. And let's say if it's supply chain or procurement or a finance process like an accounts receivable or something like that, people are already doing things in a certain way. And in a large enterprise, these processes are quite complex. They have upstream and downstream systems, all kinds of dependencies and so forth. So there has to be a lot of energy and effort that needs to be applied towards the adoption of AI into these processes. It really has to be thought through. It can't just be, look, I got this phenomenal algorithm and it's going to produce these great results. If you're not able to infuse it into the process in the right way, it's not going to happen. So business process is a key aspect of it. And finally, the organization and culture, the people aspect of it, right? That's the fourth one. Because the folks who are working those processes, they have to have a certain level of training so they are able to work effectively with these AI systems. And if they don't have the right amount of training and the right type of training, then they'll either be nervous or they won't really make the best use of these systems, and it's going to fall flat again. So those four have to move in lockstep to be able to do a successful AI implementation across your enterprise.
Inderpal, final question from me. I want to use this to get your take on what's next for this technology. As you look ahead, what predictions or projections do you see for how data analytics being used by chief data officers will continue to transform different areas of global economics?
No, it's a great question. I think what I'll start with is just to give you a sense of what we see today, and then I'll address where things are going. So today, the advice we give to our clients and customers is that you've got to be active in at least 5 areas, which is where we see people having great success in applying AI. One being customer care, and that's all the stuff you read about virtual assistants and so on and so forth. Lots of action in that space, lots of possibility and potential to greatly improve customer care and reduce costs, et cetera, et cetera. Another one is financial planning. That's another one where there's a lot of we see a lot of clients making use of AI successfully and with great effect. Employee experience is another area. Your own employees' experience as they go about working their processes, another effective one. Business operations and IT operations are the other 2 areas where we see AI being deployed effectively as enterprises embrace and make use of AI. So we literally have thousands of customers that fall into those 5 buckets. So I think that's useful for people to know if they're trying to find an initial use case where they should take aim at, because some folks run into difficulties by they select the wrong use case. And so I think you're in pretty sure ground if you pick one of those 5. The question about where things are going in the future, I think some of the near-term trends there around, you see the use of computing actually going to the edge. So there'll be a lot more intelligence at the edge. And examples of autonomous cars and so forth are the most visible, but yeah, I think it's actually going to proliferate tremendously as we move forward across all kinds of industries where it will be used. I think the use of more advanced technologies that are going to completely change the equation, like quantum computing, for instance, and this is now over a 10-year horizon. I think it'll affect every industry again, and it will take AI to the next level. Pretty much whatever we think of as just extremely superb today, we'll be able to take it all to the next level because these computers are just so much more powerful that you'll be able to solve problems that classically it's difficult to do. That'll also open up opportunities because for some time, at least for quite some time, it will be a mix of the hybrid cloud, classical computing, quantum computing, all working together. So I think that aspect will be another one that people can focus on as we move forward. The aspect around cybersecurity and its overlay with AI, I think, is going to be another area that is one that has tremendous potential and promise. And then lastly, the area around ownership. You see this with all the regulations that are coming out with data privacy as to protecting data about people and so forth. But I think there's also a nascent movement towards data sovereignty in terms of who actually owns the data. And I think some of that stuff will get clarified over the next 5-10 years as well as we move forward.
Inderpal, thank you so much for today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like we could do 5 more interviews and we would still have a lot more to cover, but I appreciate your time and your insight. It's been amazing to hear about the journey and evolution of the Chief Data Officer role, and obviously your take on all things data from a global level. We appreciate your insight and thank you so much. And we wish you and the team at IBM all the best in continuing to evolve this amazing technology. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.